They called me useless for years. Then I took everything they owned. They called it a celebration. A vineyard at sunset. Crystal glasses. Linen suits. Soft jazz floating between rows of vines like nothing ugly had ever happened on that land. 200 guests stood smiling, applauding, pretending they were witnessing legacy instead of theft. We cannot allow his incompetence to stain this family any longer. My mother's voice carried effortlessly across the lawn. Calm. Educated. Precise. Every word chosen the way surgeons choose instruments. She lifted her champagne glass and pointed, openly, deliberately, toward the back of the crowd. Toward me. I stood there in a server's jacket, a tray balanced perfectly in my left hand, my posture straight. 200 faces turned at once. Some curious. Some uncomfortable. Most relieved it wasn't them. My father didn't react at all. He simply took another sip of wine, eyes forward, as if public humiliation were whether unfortunate, but expected. I didn't flinch. I didn't leave. I checked my watch. 7:11 p.m. Perfect. They thought they were ending my relevance. They had no idea they were activating something I'd spent 5 years building in silence. Before I explain how I legally removed my own parents from a $15 million estate in under 10 minutes, ask yourself something first. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who benefited most from your labor? I slipped through the service doors into the commercial kitchen. Steel counters. White tile. The hum of refrigeration units. This was where sound went to die, and where thoughts finally became audible. I set the tray down carefully and looked at the manila envelope pressed into my hand moments earlier by Mr. Caldwell, the family's longtime legal advisor. My hands were steady. 5 years of controlled breathing will do that. It teaches your body restraint long before your mind catches up. My name is Evan Calder. I am 29 years old. And for the last half-decade, my official role in the Calder estate was family support staff. Unpaid. That phrasing had been my mother's idea. She enjoyed language. She said it softened the reality. My brother, Nolan, received $500,000 a year to explore opportunities in Europe. I received a converted room near the delivery bay and a lecture about humility. They called it character building. What it actually was extraction. I managed logistics for the estate's commercial operations. I balanced accounts. I drafted redevelopment plans for the new tasting hall Nolan now claimed as his vision. I handled vendor contracts, compliance filings, insurance renewals. Quiet work. Invisible work. The kind that only matters when it stops. The cruelty wasn't the money. It was the documentation. Every Friday at 5 o'clock, my mother summoned me into her study. Mahogany desk. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A single sheet of paper slid toward me. Log your hours, she would say pleasantly. It's important to track how long tasks take you. 80 hours. 90. Sometimes more. I signed every sheet. Not because I was obedient, but because I am meticulous. People like her mistake quiet compliance for intellectual absence. That error funded my exit. Why did I stay? That's the question people ask when they've never lived inside a system where cruelty is normalized and affection is conditional. When you grow up being told your worth is functional, you don't dream of escape. You dream of usefulness. I believed that if I proved my value long enough, they would stop treating me like an inconvenience. I was wrong. I opened the envelope. It wasn't a will. It was the original operating agreement for the Calder Estates commercial holdings, signed 10 years earlier by my grandfather, Walter Calder. A clause near the center had been highlighted. My chest tightened, not with panic, but recognition. I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted folder where I had scanned every single timesheet I'd signed over the last 5 years. Hundreds of pages. All countersigned. All dated. All verified. My mother believed she was building a record of my inadequacy. What she actually created was a ledger of debt. According to Walter's agreement, unpaid labor documented and verified by an executive signatory converted into controlling interest after a defined threshold. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had legally transferred ownership to me, one Friday at a time. I closed the folder. Picked up the tray. I wasn't staff anymore. I was the invoice. And it was time to present it. Outside, the band played a harmless jazz standard designed to encourage conversation without attention. I walked straight past the rose trellis to the main power console. No hesitation. I pulled the master cable. Music collapsed mid-note. Microphones died. Conversations shattered into silence so sudden it felt physical. My mother froze on stage. Slowly, very slowly, she turned and looked at me. And for the first time that evening, her expression wasn't composed. It was calculating. She stepped down from the platform, each step deliberate, rehearsed fury contained behind perfect posture. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked quietly, gripping my arm. I met her eyes. "The event is over," I said. My brother laughed behind her. Sharp. Dismissive. "Look at him," Nolan said. "Always dramatic when he wants attention." This wasn't drama. This was procedure. I glanced at my watch again. 7:19 p.m. Right on schedule. The silence was heavier than any music I had ever known. 200 guests froze in place. Crystal glasses, polished shoes, glances darting nervously. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the servers halted mid-step, trays suspended in the air like puppets with their strings cut. I stepped closer to the microphone. The stage, now my territory, trembled slightly under the weight of my presence. My father's face, calm just seconds ago, now twitched. The careful composure he had spent decades cultivating unraveled in microseconds. I had seen this look before, on boardrooms, on competitors, on men who thought themselves untouchable. The recognition of imminent loss. The silent calculation of what they had underestimated. I held up the envelope, letting the ambient light illuminate the bold, embossed letters of the Calder Estates Commercial Operating Agreement. Every person who had any idea what this meant leaned forward, eyes widening. They were investors, lawyers, and family friends who prided themselves on understanding leverage. They understood this instantly. "I am now the controlling shareholder of the commercial wing," I said, voice steady, precise. "The unpaid labor documented here converts to a majority stake in the company. Effective immediately." A ripple ran through the crowd, soft at first, then louder. Murmurs grew, whispers circled like smoke, and people started drawing out phones to record, photograph, or fact-check. My father's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. He didn't sip it. He couldn't. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and he knew precisely who had pulled the first brick. "Impossible," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "It's not impossible," I replied. "It's legally binding. You've verified every hour yourself. You've signed the time sheets. You've authenticated them in your own handwriting." My brother, Nolan, laughed nervously, tapping his expensive watch. "You think this gives you control? We'll fix it. Dad will." "He won't," I interrupted calmly. "You've done exactly what was required to transfer control. And you didn't realize it." He stared at me, then at my mother, who had regained a fragment of composure but not enough to mask the underlying panic. This was no longer a performance. For the first time, she was aware she had miscalculated her son's, my, capabilities. I stepped off the stage slowly, walking toward the main doors of the tent. Every movement measured. Every breath a metronome of quiet authority. "The event is over," I said again, this time louder, sharper. The crowd flinched under the weight of the words. "All unauthorized personnel must vacate immediately." My mother moved forward, placing a hand on my arm. "Evan, you're being cruel. This isn't how families resolve issues." I looked at her, eyes unwavering. "This is exactly how families resolve issues when one party consistently abuses the other's labor and intelligence." My father barked, voice raised, "You can't just stop everything. These people, these investors, have commitments. This is fraud." I paused, letting the words settle, letting the absurdity of his statement hang in the air. The man who had spent decades constructing an empire on the backs of the competent now accused competence of fraud. I allowed a single breath of satisfaction to pass through my chest, silent, invisible, but mine. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Messages, encrypted notes, and scanned documents flickered across the screen. Each one a testament to the years of precision and unseen labor that had gone unnoticed. Every single one a weapon waiting for the right moment. I tapped the app, sending automated emails to key stakeholders with attached proof, contracts, verified labor hours, legal citations, operational agreements. Everything that validated my claim. The digital evidence flowed faster than any verbal argument could counter. A murmur rose among the crowd. Phones pointed at my father. Lawyers whispered. Investors checked the documents I had just sent. Faces that had once smiled at his charisma now twisted in disbelief. My father's eyes flicked to the tent entrance. He saw the black SUVs waiting, and the men in tactical attire stepping forward with calm precision. He hadn't expected them yet, and his calculated confidence faltered. "This isn't over," he said, teeth gritted. "You're making a mistake, Evan." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Everything was unfolding exactly as it had been planned. For 5 years, I had anticipated every move, every argument, every manipulation. The legal framework, the timing, the witnesses, the evidence, it was all aligned. The first guests began to leave voluntarily, sensing the tension, the shifting power. Staff followed quietly, some glancing at me with curiosity, some with the relief of someone who had been waiting for justice for years. The exodus grew, like a slow tide pulling everything away from the shore. My father realized his authority had evaporated. He attempted to regain control, raising his voice again, but the power dynamics had shifted irreversibly. His threats were empty, his charisma, impotent. I glanced at my brother one last time. The smirk was gone. Fear replaced it. Not fear of me personally, but fear of exposure. Every line of deceit, every misappropriated resource, every hidden flaw now hung in the light. I stepped back onto the stage, calm, precise. My mother's face paled as she followed me with her eyes, realizing she had backed the wrong side of history. It was quiet again. But this time, the silence belonged to me. The stage was mine. The evidence was mine. The law was mine. And very soon, the estate would be mine as well. The room was thinning now. Guests had started to retreat, their murmurings forming a low hum of gossip and disbelief. Some whispered about the audacity of the move, some about the legality, and some simply about the spectacle. I didn't care. Every single person leaving confirmed one thing: my leverage was absolute. I had turned invisibility into authority. I returned to the stage, my eyes sweeping across the emptying tent, and saw my father, Gregory, trying desperately to compose himself. The arrogance that had filled this room just moments ago had been replaced with the brittle edges of panic. He realized he wasn't just losing face, he was losing everything he thought he owned. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cool air of vindication. Every careful calculation I had performed for 5 long years had led to this exact moment. Each unpaid hour, each meticulous record, each legal review and notarized timesheet had been preserved in anticipation of an opportunity like this. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, voice calm but commanding, cutting through the residual murmurs. "All documents presented here, all labor records, and all ownership claims have been verified, notarized, and archived. Any attempt to reverse or dispute them will be met with legal action, and you know as well as I do that these claims are ironclad." Gregory's face twisted with disbelief. "Evan, you can't, this is family. You can't, this is fraud." I let the words hang. I allowed him to wallow in the impotence of shouting at a room where authority had shifted silently but irrevocably. His protests were not arguments, they were proof of panic. He had built his empire on the assumption of my compliance, of my invisibility, and now that assumption had crumbled. Nolan, my younger brother, fidgeted near the stage edge, trying to appear engaged but clearly unsure. His calculations had been as shallow as his attention span, and he realized that every one of his reckless gambles, every financial misstep, was now being exposed by the sheer weight of the documentation I had collected. I lifted the tablet displaying the full ledger. "I suggest everyone here carefully review the documents I've just submitted. They outline, in excruciating detail, the hours I've worked, the tasks I've executed, and the legally binding agreements that designate me as the controlling shareholder of the commercial estate." The color drained from Gregory's face as his gaze tracked the scrolling ledger. He was calculating, second by second, the losses, the impossibilities, the ways his previous arrogance had been meticulously accounted for and countered. The humiliation was palpable. I let it simmer. "Everything you thought you had built," I continued, "everything you relied upon to assert control over this property and this company, has been legally undermined by your own actions and your own signatures. Every document you signed verified my labor and my authority. Every minute you thought I was a servant was actually an investment in the legitimacy of my claim." A few guests who had paused near the back started whispering among themselves, clearly impressed by the legal tightrope I had navigated. Lawyers in the audience nodded subtly, they understood the significance. Investors pulled out phones, some making notes, others snapping photos. The room had become a theater, and I was both director and lead performer. Gregory's shoulders slumped. The first cracks of desperation appeared. "This isn't over," he muttered, voice low, almost a hiss. "We'll contest this. The courts, this is family, Evan. I shook my head slowly, letting the calmness of my movements emphasize my dominance. You've had 27 years to recognize my value. Instead, you chose to exploit it. Now, you face the consequences of your own miscalculations. He looked at my mother, pleading silently. Cynthia's face was pale, the sparkle of her diamonds failing to mask the fear behind her eyes. Even she, trained in manipulation, had run out of scripts. Her usual arsenal of guilt, pity, and condescension was useless here. There were no words left, no threats that could override what I had built. I scanned the room again, eyes landing on the servers and security personnel who had witnessed my meticulous planning unfold in real time. Their understanding was quiet but solid. The estate and its operational control had shifted, irrevocably, into my hands. I stepped down from the stage, walking toward the main doors with slow, deliberate steps. Leave now, I said, my voice low but clear. The property is under new management. You have 10 minutes to vacate before I authorize removal of any remaining unauthorized personnel. Gregory's jaw tightened. You can't do this, he said, each word punctuated by disbelief and anger. This is a house. This is a legacy. You are only a manager of illusions, I interrupted softly, almost kindly. The legacy was never yours to command. It was mine all along. By now, the tactical team, silent and precise, had taken positions near the exits. The message was unspoken, any resistance would be met with immediate removal. Even the remaining guests hesitated, glancing between the stage and the approaching men in black. I turned my attention to my father, letting my gaze pierce the fog of his disbelief. Every lesson he had tried to teach me about obedience, submission, and the so-called hierarchy of family had been nullified. Every hour of hidden labor, every careful record-keeping tactic, every strategic move had coalesced into one undeniable truth: I was the rightful authority here, and he had signed every document that proved it. The room was quiet now. Gregory's voice, once commanding, was reduced to whispers and stammers. Nolan's expression, once smug, had shifted into the awareness of impending ruin. Cynthia clutched her pearls, silent at last. Victory was not just mine, it was inescapable. And somewhere deep inside, I smiled, not outwardly, not with celebration, but with the cold, unshakable satisfaction of knowing that justice, meticulously planned and flawlessly executed, had been served. The first flashes of blue and red cut through the early evening haze. I had anticipated every possible outcome, every variable, but the sight of the local police arriving still triggered a subtle thrill of control. This wasn't chaos, it was theater, perfectly choreographed. 2 officers approached, their eyes sharp and cautious. Gregory's gaze followed theirs, his jaw tightening. He didn't understand yet that I had already accounted for them in my strategy. The legal documents were clear: I wasn't a trespasser. I was the property owner. Yet, the officers treated me as if I were a criminal, a mistake on his part that would soon become his own undoing. "Step aside, sir," one officer said to Gregory, brushing past him with professional calm. His words carried no judgment, only procedure. Gregory sputtered, trying to assert dominance, but the quiet authority of law overrode his performance. I stepped forward, hands visible. Calm. Measured. The officers turned to me. "Miss Kara, we have orders to detain you for alleged corporate theft and misappropriation of assets," one stated, reading from a sheet. I tilted my head, expression neutral. "You'll want to verify those claims before making any arrests," I said softly. "I am the controlling shareholder. My authority is legally documented and notarized. You are acting on incomplete or intentionally misleading information." Gregory's mouth opened, then closed, struggling for words. He had thought his accusations, his web of lies and deception, would carry weight. But the moment the officers glanced at the signed documents I handed over moments ago, the illusion shattered. They read the operating agreement, the recorded unpaid labor logs, and the notarized time sheets. Slowly, comprehension dawned on them. "This changes things," one officer muttered. He looked at his partner, and together they glanced back at Gregory, who had gone pale, his performance unraveling. The guests, who had lingered near the edges, were now watching silently. They weren't part of this calculation, they were witnesses, and their judgment would spread beyond these grounds. Investors, lawyers, and socialites alike understood the stakes, and a few discreetly recorded the moment. Gregory's voice, once booming, had reduced to whispers. You can't, this is theft." He gestured toward the documents, toward the estate, toward the very air. "This is my property. This is my legacy." I met his gaze steadily. Your legacy was always built on the work of others. On the labor you assumed was invisible. On documents you signed without understanding their consequences. That illusion is over. The officers moved closer, ready to enforce standard procedure, but their movements slowed. Every action had to be measured now. My legal standing was absolute, and any misstep could become an actionable liability for them. I could feel the weight of control pressing evenly across the scene. I walked slowly toward the front of the estate, past the shocked crowd, past the remnants of the disrupted event. I allowed myself one glance back. Gregory's expression was a mixture of disbelief, rage, and helplessness. My younger brother, Nolan, was frozen, unsure how to intervene or even speak. My mother, Cynthia, clutched her pearls tightly, eyes darting to the exit as if escape could restore her dignity. I raised my voice, calm and authoritative. This property is under my full legal control. Any interference, obstruction, or attempts to reclaim authority without consent will result in immediate legal action. You have been warned. The officers noted my words, silent but attentive. They didn't need theatrics. The law was clear, and they could see that I had prepared every angle. This wasn't arrogance. This was certainty born from meticulous planning. Gregory tried one last desperate maneuver, reaching for his phone as if a single call could undo years of careful strategy. I anticipated it, keeping my composure. Call all you want, I said softly. Your emergency contacts cannot override the law or the documents you yourself signed. Every signature, every timesheet, every labor log strengthens my claim and weakens yours. He froze. The weight of inevitability settled over him. It was almost tangible, the slow realization that his empire was no longer his to control. For decades, he had assumed dominance over everyone around him, manipulating, exploiting, and silencing. And now, every bit of that dominance had evaporated, replaced by the authority I had quietly built in his shadow. I allowed a moment of silence, letting the gravity of the situation sink in for all present. Every detail, every calculated step, every document meticulously archived over the past 5 years had led to this precise moment. The humiliation, the shock, the helplessness, it wasn't anger I felt. It was justice. Finally, the lead officer looked at me, nodded slightly, and lowered his hand. The tension in the air seemed to crystallize. Gregory understood, his authority had crumbled, and the law, backed by my preparation, was now aligned with me. I stepped away, letting them absorb the outcome. I didn't shout. I didn't celebrate. I simply moved through the estate with the calm satisfaction of someone who had been underestimated for too long. Today, they had learned a critical lesson: power wasn't inherited. Power was earned. And sometimes, the one they called insignificant was the one quietly writing the rules for everyone else. The estate was quiet now. The chaos of sirens and startled guests had dissipated, leaving a stillness that felt almost sacred. I walked through the main hall, every step measured, the polished wood floors reflecting the dim evening light. The documents in my hand were my armor, every notarized sheet, every unpaid labor log, every carefully scanned signature was a weapon far sharper than any anger or shout. Gregory lingered in the library, his posture rigid, trying to muster the dignity that had once come so effortlessly. He looked at me, eyes wide, realizing that his theatrics, his bullying, his threats, all of it had been meticulously neutralized by patience, intelligence, and preparation. "You really did this," he said, voice tight, almost a whisper. "After everything, how?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let my gaze sweep over the room, taking in the art he had prized, the furniture he thought symbolized power, the very objects he assumed were untouchable. All of it had been earned by others, my labor, my planning, my foresight. "It's simple," I said finally. "You built an empire on assumption. I built mine on certainty. And certainty always wins." He clenched his fists, struggling to grasp the reality of his defeat. Nolan, my younger brother, flinched, realizing his own complicity in the years of neglect and indulgence. Even Cynthia, my mother, hovered near the staircase, eyes darting between us, her mask of composure cracking. I turned my attention fully to Gregory. "You underestimated me. You assumed that compliance, paperwork, and invisible labor could be ignored, that the one you thought was insignificant would remain silent forever. You forgot one key truth: systems, laws, and contracts obey precision, not ego. And I have spent years mastering them." He opened his mouth to protest, but no words formed. His empire had evaporated not through force, not through confrontation, but through meticulous planning and patience. Every fraudulent decision, every falsified timesheet, every act of negligence he had committed had been quietly recorded, catalogued, and preserved. And now, it was all leveraged against him with surgical precision. I moved to the estate office, pulling up the digital ledger I had prepared. "Here," I said, pointing to the screen. "Your accounts, your corporate filings, every single transaction. I've reconciled them. You are in violation of multiple statutes, and the board will see everything. No amount of pleading or manipulation will erase this." Gregory's face went pale. He had spent decades ensuring control through intimidation. He hadn't realized that control required more than fear, it required understanding. And that was the one thing I had always cultivated in silence. The guests, now gathering near the main doors, were witnessing a spectacle far more powerful than any gala or performance. This was authority. Real authority. Not charisma, not inherited wealth, not borrowed influence, but true command born of knowledge and preparation. "You see," I continued, my voice steady and calm, "the documents your father, Beatrice, signed years ago? They weren't forgotten. The unpaid labor records I kept? They weren't destroyed. Your assumptions about loyalty and fear? They were your weakness." Gregory shook his head slowly, as if trying to deny the reality. You can't just." "I already have," I interrupted. "The commercial wing is mine. All operations, all permits, all licenses, they fall under my control. Your attempts to manipulate, intimidate, or reclaim authority are null and void. The law, the contracts, and your own signed statements enforce this." He swallowed hard, realizing that his entire world had shifted beneath his feet. For the first time, the man who had always wielded power effortlessly understood vulnerability. The tables were reversed. I exhaled slowly, a rare acknowledgement of the effort it had taken to orchestrate this moment. 5 years of meticulous observation, preparation, and record-keeping had culminated in this quiet triumph. No shouting. No violent confrontation. Just cold, calculated, undeniable authority. Turning to the remaining staff, I issued a single instruction: begin operations under my authority. Notify all stakeholders. This estate is now under the full jurisdiction of Kara Vance. Every eye in the room followed me as I walked past Gregory, past Nolan, past Cynthia, toward the main control console. I could feel the weight of history, the burden of years spent underestimated, and yet it was lightened by the precision of justice. I pressed a series of keys. The estate systems, previously under their chaotic control, now obeyed my commands. Lights, locks, security, and communications, all synchronized under my authority. The room hummed with quiet power, a stark contrast to the earlier chaos. Gregory's shoulders slumped, the realization complete. He had not been outsmarted by luck or chance. He had been outmaneuvered by preparation, patience, and intellect. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had spent a lifetime building walls of control was now powerless behind the very gates he had raised. I stepped back, watching as he processed the finality of his situation. "I hope you understand," I said, voice soft but unwavering, "that this isn't personal. It's business. And business has rules." He nodded faintly, defeated but not yet broken. You earned this," he admitted, voice hollow. "Yes," I said. "I did. And now, I intend to build something that lasts, not through intimidation or cruelty, but through discipline, foresight, and respect for what truly matters." For the first time in years, I felt the rarest emotion, true freedom. Freedom not only from their control but from the shadow of doubt, the suffocating expectation of obedience, and the silent assumption that my efforts were invisible. The estate was mine. The legacy, rebuilt on merit, law, and intellect, was secure. And I had finally turned every insult, every dismissal, and every act of cruelty into the most satisfying, irrefutable proof that underestimation is always the precursor to justice. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my new office, casting clean, sharp lines across the polished desk. The estate behind me was silent, the chaos of yesterday replaced by a still, almost reverent quiet. I sipped black coffee, letting the warmth seep through my hands as I surveyed the space I had claimed, not with violence or bluster, but through precision, law, and patience. Kara Vance, me now, under my real name, Cole Harding, was no longer a shadow in someone else's empire. I was the architect of my own. Every action I had taken, every meticulous record I had kept, every long hour spent in quiet planning had led to this moment. The estate's commercial wing hummed with life under my direction. Operations that had once been mismanaged were now synchronized, efficient, and lawful. Employees whispered my name with a mix of respect and awe. They had watched me endure humiliation, overwork, and dismissal, and now they witnessed the precise and unassailable reversal of fortune. Gregory, my father, had vanished from the estate, humiliated but unharmed. He would rebuild his life elsewhere, perhaps learn humility in ways he had never been taught. Nolan, my brother, would face the consequences of his complicity, forced to confront the realities of entitlement and negligence. And my mother, Cynthia, had retreated to Arizona, her manipulations powerless against the law and my preparation. I opened a drawer and pulled out the meticulously organized folder of time sheets, scanned signatures, and legal documents. I had turned their cruelty into leverage, their disdain into proof, their neglect into undeniable authority. Every injustice had been catalogued. Every slight had been accounted for. And now, all of it existed in a state of perfect equilibrium. I was untouchable, legally and morally. 6 months later, the Highland estate had been transformed. The commercial wing was now Beatrice and Harding Vineyards, a name honoring foresight and meticulous stewardship rather than legacy or birthright. The mansion had been repurposed as a scholar's retreat, a sanctuary for students and young innovators who, like me, had been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. Visitors would tour the vineyards, unaware of the decades-long struggle behind the gates, seeing only the fruits of diligence and vision. I had created a legacy not out of privilege, but out of knowledge, patience, and quiet determination. Victoria, my sister, had applied for a small loan to expand her own ventures. I sent her an employment opportunity in the vineyards instead. She would work, learn the value of effort, and perhaps one day understand that entitlement is no substitute for competence. I sat back in my chair, fingers lightly tracing the edge of a framed time sheet for my 27th birthday, 82 hours logged, every hour signed by Gregory himself. It was a reminder of the cost of underestimation and the power of meticulous planning. Power, I realized, is not inherited. It is earned, quietly, relentlessly, and without fanfare. Outside, the sun continued to rise over the vineyards, casting a warm glow on the grapes that would one day be harvested, bottled, and celebrated. This estate was no longer a symbol of oppression, it was a monument to precision, foresight, and justice. And I, the one they had once dismissed, was at its helm. I allowed myself a small, rare smile. It wasn't triumph in the emotional sense. It was calm satisfaction, a deep recognition of cause and effect, of preparation meeting opportunity. The past 5 years of struggle, invisibility, and dismissal had not broken me. They had sharpened me. And now, finally, I moved forward not as a reactive force, but as a sovereign in my own right. I reached for the phone and drafted the first newsletter to our new stakeholders. Clear, concise, and unwavering. A vision built on integrity, compliance, and foresight. The estate had been mine in principle for years, now it was mine in reality. And in that quiet morning, with sunlight warming the office, I understood something profound. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is not shouting, not destruction, not humiliation. Sometimes, it is the unassailable, the calm, the deliberate assertion of control and justice, so complete that the opposition is left powerless, silent, and irrelevant. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the new day fill the room. For the first time in decades, the weight of expectation, cruelty, and dismissal had been lifted. And in that space, freedom was absolute. The story of underestimation, injustice, and intellectual perseverance had reached its conclusion. The estate was secure, the family's manipulations dismantled, and my future, crafted in the shadow of their arrogance, was finally mine to command. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.